John here from Great Lakes Country with another regional sandwich video. You know, I don't know the first thing about golf. I've never been into it, never really been a fan or a player or a spectator. So when I was researching regional sandwiches that are very popular in different states in the US, I didn't really have any idea what it meant when I read the famous Masters Pimento Cheese sandwich. Well, as I learned, the Masters is a very apparently well-known golf tournament that takes place in Augusta, Georgia. And for whatever reason, it's been a staple of the concessions that are sold at the Masters tournament to have a pimento cheese sandwich. And apparently people down there can't get enough of it. Now, I think pimento cheese is much more of a southern sort of a thing. I've definitely heard of it way up here in Michigan. I think I've seen it maybe at parties or, you know, at the deli case at the grocery store. You could buy it by the pound or whatever. Never had it, never tried it, didn't really know what it was or what it was for. But if it's the official favorite sandwich of the state of Georgia, well, I gotta make it and I gotta try it. So that's exactly what we're doing in this video, and I'm going to take my best stab at recreating the Georgia, specifically the Masters in Augusta, Georgia version of the pimento cheese sandwich. And for our pimento cheese, there's just a little bit of prep work. The first thing we have to do is get some extra sharp cheddar cheese grated up, and I am gonna be using the finer side of my box grater to get some relatively fine shreds of this cheese. And I'll just keep going until I've got 2 cups of those shreds. Something about like that. Next, we need to get us a yellow onion, and I'll just get the ends cut off, get rid of the skin. And with a freshly washed box grater, we're going to grate up some of this yellow onion until I've got about 1 tablespoon of the grated onion. Next, we can't have a pimento cheese without our pimentos, and they tend to come in little jars like this. What we've got here is 4 ounces of diced pimentos, and I am going to drain these because they're packed in liquid. And these are diced, but I think I'd like them to be chopped just a little bit finer than this. So I'm not gonna go crazy, I'll just give them a once or twice over. Make all those little pieces just a little bit smaller. And the pimentos are ready. And now we've got all the components together for our pimento cheese, so we can put it all together. Starting with 1 8-ounce block of cream cheese. That's been sitting on the counter for a couple hours so it gets nice and softened. Next, a couple of cups of the finely shredded extra sharp cheddar, half a cup of mayonnaise, a tablespoon of grated onion, half teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 teaspoon kosher salt, 1/4 teaspoon black pepper, and optionally about half a teaspoon of some hot sauce. Finally, our pimentos, and in case you're not familiar, pimentos really aren't spicy at all. They're really kind of sweet. If you do want a little bit of zip to your pimento cheese, oh, that's where that hot sauce comes in. Now we'll get our bowl o' ingredients into the stand mixer, get the paddle attachment in there, and we're just gonna start mixing on low speed for just a couple, 3-4 minutes until everything's completely incorporated, looking creamy, and looking like a nice pimento cheese spread. And there we have it. Our very easy and delicious pimento cheese spread is finished. So I'll get it all transferred into a container so I can put a lid on it and stick this thing in the refrigerator for a little while. Let it get just a little bit firmed up, and it should be perfect when we're ready to use it and make us some sandwiches. All right, our pimento cheese is ready, but you know, that almost seemed too easy. But now I need some really nice white bread to make these sandwiches out of. So I'm thinking, let's make that from scratch. And to make our bread, we'll start by combining 125 grams of whole milk with 175 grams of water. And I need to heat this liquid to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which I'll just do in the microwave. We don't really want to go any hotter than that because then we might kill the yeast, which is the next thing going into this. And our milk and water is right at 100 degrees. So in goes 7 grams of active dry yeast, or 1 of those little packets. I'll give this all just a little bit of a stir, and then we're gonna set this aside for 5 or 10 minutes to let that yeast bloom. That is, get nice and foamy in that liquid, which lets us know that the yeast is alive and well. And when that yeast mixture is looking pretty foamy, into the bowl of my stand mixer it goes. along with 400 grams of all-purpose flour, 20 grams of white sugar, 8 grams of salt, and 4 grams of dough conditioner. And I use this brand, which I just buy online, and you could consider it an optional ingredient, but it really does help make a bread dough more soft and supple, rise a little better, taste a little better. Don't exactly know the specific mechanics of how it works, but I definitely do recommend it if you want to make some really nice bread. Then we're putting on the old dough hook, and I'm gonna let this run on medium-low speed for about 3 minutes. And while that's mixing, I'll mention, in full disclosure, I actually started this dough earlier in the day because there's all that time needed for the dough to proof and rise, and that gave me plenty of time to make the actual pimento cheese while waiting for that. But for the sake of the flow of how I wanted to present this video, well, I guess I made it look like I did the dough after the pimento cheese. But it doesn't really matter, and the end result is gonna be the same either way. And after 3 minutes, when all of this is starting to come together into somewhat of a dough, we're gonna add one more ingredient, and that's 3 tablespoons of sliced up butter that's been set at room temperature to make sure it's nice and soft. And now we're going back on to about medium-low speed for another 8 minutes. And once our dough has finished kneading, we'll get the board lightly floured. Maybe that's a little more than lightly. And turn out that dough. And now we're just gonna get this thing rolled up into somewhat of a tight ball. This dough is gonna be pretty sticky for the most part, and that's perfectly fine. That's what we want. As long as it's not completely sticking to your hands or the cutting board, you don't really wanna add much more flour to it. But that's looking and feeling really nice to me. We'll just get that shaped into a ball. Then we'll get us a bowl nicely greased up with some cooking spray. Drop in that dough ball and cover the whole thing with some plastic wrap. Or use a damp towel or use a little proofing box if you got something like that. And now we're just going to set this bowl with the dough in it aside to let it rise for 90 minutes. And after 90 minutes, our dough has definitely doubled in size. It's looking very nice, so now we just need to get it transferred out onto a floured surface once again. And we'll press it down, degas it a bit, give it a couple little folds, because now we need to form and shape it to the size of our bread pan. Now, ordinarily I'd use a bread pan something like this, pretty standard shape and size of a bread pan, but today we're trying to make the most perfect sandwich bread slices, and for that I'm gonna be using this little Pullman pan. And these things are pretty cool. They're barely tapered on the inside. They're about as tall as they are wide, give or take, and they come with this lid, so you can really seal it in there, get even heating on all sides, and create just some very nice symmetrical slices for sandwiches. So I'm gonna be forming my piece of dough to the size of this little Pullman pan, and to do that, it's pretty simple. I'm just gonna get this thing pressed out to about the length of that pan, and then roll it out just a little bit. I don't need to go crazy, just get it looking something close to a rectangle. And then I'll just start rolling this thing up as best I can. It's not gonna be a real precise job. I know some people get really particular about how they do this step, but really just trying to get this thing tightly rolled, relatively even all the way across, but any little imperfections or misshapen parts really are gonna straighten themselves out during the second rise. Here I've got a bit of a seam on the bottom, and I'll just get that all pinched closed. This dough's very nice and soft and supple, still a little bit sticky, precisely what it's supposed to be. Now I'll get this Pullman pan sprayed down with some cooking spray. Just a light coating. It's gonna help prevent stickage when it's time to pull this bread out later, of course. And then into the pan goes our dough, just like that. Now on goes the lid, and we're gonna set this aside and let it rise for 1 more hour. And after another hour, our bread has risen again, and it's looking very nice. Anyway, now I'm gonna get this pan into the oven that's been preheated to 350 degrees, and we're gonna bake for 40 to 45 minutes or until the internal temperature has reached 190. And after just about 40 minutes, we're coming out of the oven and let's see how we did. And that is looking marvelous. Exactly like I'd hoped it would look. Filled this whole pan up pretty much edge to edge, nice and flat, nice and symmetrical. And because a ton of steam is trapped inside of this type of pan while it's cooking, pretty much as soon as possible we want to get it out of there. Because if we leave it in that pan, like to start cooling, it's just gonna continue being surrounded by all that trapped steam. We risk getting some kind of a soggy loaf of bread. It could even start to collapse if it gets too moist in there. But now that I've got it on my wire rack, I'll just set this aside for a little while until it's pretty much down to room temperature and we can slice on in and start making us a couple of these pimento cheese sandwiches. All right, what do you say we slice into this loaf of bread and make us a couple sandwiches? I do think I want to take that heel off, even though it's super thin compared to maybe a regular loaf of bread. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That is some good, soft, beautiful sandwich bread right there. And I'm not exactly sure why, but for this kind of sandwich, I feel like it needs slightly thicker slices of bread than maybe your ordinary bag of sandwich slices from the store. I don't know, maybe something about like that. And let's see if I can cut these even remotely evenly. Yeah, that looks pretty nice to me. Not 100% even, but we're gonna work with it. And to build this sandwich, I don't think it could possibly get much simpler. We're just gonna slather down a generous portion of this pimento cheese. Not gonna cheap out. We need to make this thing worthwhile of being state of Georgia's favorite sandwich. And on goes the lid. And I'm not exactly sure if this is gonna be considered regulation, but something about this kind of sandwich makes me want to slice off the crusts. Not too bad, not too bad. But finally, I think we need to go diagonally right down the middle. And as far as a sandwich made from a cheese spread on a couple slices of bread, it doesn't look too bad. But now, I don't think there's anything left to do but dig in and have a bite. All right, let's get into this, see how we did. Well, I'll say it's pretty tasty. That pimento cheese, it's got a really nice flavor. Probably seems like a lot of bread, but it's just super fluffy and soft. Plus, I knew that pimento cheese was gonna be pretty rich and it would need, you know, a little bit of a substantial bread component maybe to balance that out. And no, I think that was the right move. Let me get another one. I gotta say that I'm really getting the sharp, extra sharp cheddar is the main flavor that's coming through. It's nicely balanced with all the other flavors, but in researching for the best recipe to try making, a lot of them called for way more of that sharp cheddar, you know, like 3 cups for a batch this size. I had a feeling that that was gonna be too much and I knocked it down to 2 cups, and I definitely think that was the right move. I don't know that I would have tasted anything else in there if I used all 3 cups of the cheddar. But I'm getting the cream cheese in there and the little pimentos. They don't have a real overpowering flavor, but they're in there and they're tasty. So yeah, I'd say that I enjoy that quite a bit, but I don't know that that's a flavor that I want to eat an entire sandwich worth of. I think pimento cheese is often used in the format of like a party dip, you know, spread a little on a cracker here and there. I think I could get on board with that, but I don't know that I'd want to eat a full sandwich of this. And especially in the heat of Augusta, Georgia, you know, during a day of walking around a massive golf course, I'm sure it's hot and sweaty. Is a cheese on mayo sandwich especially refreshing in a setting like that? Well, I don't know. Who am I to say? People love it. Fortunately, I've got people to share the rest of this with because I think after about half of that sandwich, I'm probably good for the rest of the day. It's pretty rich. It's a lot of kind of just that flavor that's taking everything over. And yeah, like I said, I don't know how much of that I really want to eat all in one sitting. But it's very tasty and I'm glad I made it. And if you want to see how I made this exact pimento cheese, well, I'll put a link in the video description below to the full written out recipe. And you know what? I'll put a link in there to the bread recipe as well. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future food and lots more regional sandwich videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.